Imagine walking into a crowded room, laughter echoing, glasses clinking, small talk, buzzing like static in the background. Everyone's engaged in casual conversation, present only on the surface. And you're standing there with a telescope strapped to your face, seeing galaxies no one else even knows exist. You try to point them out. You gesture. You explain, but no one sees what you see. So eventually you lower the lens. You smile politely. You nod at the right moments. And you pretend you're looking at the same things they are. This is the unspoken reality for those who feel too much notice, too much know too much before anything is ever said. Most people don't talk about this part, the strange burden of sensing a pattern before it emerges, of hearing the tremble in someone's voice when their words are perfectly composed, of detecting the unraveling long before it begins. You don't try to notice, you just do. And the longer you live like this, the harder it becomes to explain. Because how do you describe the ache of seeing truth where others see nothing? How do you explain the exhaustion that comes from being tuned into frequencies no one else even hears? Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." If that quote lands in your chest like a stone, then you already know. You see the cracks in relationships before they fracture. You sense the burnout behind the fake productivity. You notice the longing behind the "I'm doing great" and the quiet desperation hidden behind success stories. You feel the lies behind the polite smiles. And when you try to speak about it, you hear you're overanalyzing. You're too much. Why can't you just let it go? But the truth is you're not overthinking. You're overfeeling. You always have been. And after years of trying to dim yourself down to fit into a world that rewards surface over substance, silence starts to feel safer than honesty. You begin to pull back. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned that truth makes people flinch. They weren't ready for it. They didn't ask for it. And so you stopped offering it. This is the cost no one tells you about when it comes to emotional or spiritual intelligence. It's not just about what you know, it's about what you feel. And that feeling, that awareness, it sets you apart. Not because you're better, but because you're attuned to a different signal. You're tuned to depth, to the spaces in between the words, to the silences that scream louder than conversations. But that frequency, it comes with a cost. Statistically, individuals in the top 2% of intelligence, especially those with high emotional and intuitive sensitivity, are 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Not because they're unstable, but because they're constantly processing what others don't even register. Their nervous systems are flooded. Their minds rarely rest. Their hearts carry weight most people never even touch. But you wouldn't know it by looking at them. They blend in. They smile on cue. They've mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. Until one day, they can't. Until the burden becomes too heavy. Until the dissonance between what they know and what they must pretend to be becomes unbearable. And here's where the real questions begin. Not "what's wrong with me," but "what am I supposed to do with this?" Because you've tried softening your edges. You've tried shrinking yourself to fit. You've nodded when your entire body screamed, "No." You've stayed quiet when your soul burned to speak. But still, the ache hasn't gone away. So maybe the ache isn't a flaw. Maybe it's not a problem to fix. Maybe it's a signal, a sacred pull calling you out of the shallow waters of societal expectation. Maybe your soul is telling you you were never meant to stay small. Carl Jung didn't study behavior to help people become more normal. He studied the soul to help people become whole. He believed that what makes us different, our sensitivity, our darkness, our perception, isn't a dysfunction. It's a calling. But to rise into that calling, you must first go inward, into the shadows, into the parts of yourself you've ignored, into the voices you've silenced, into the figures that shaped your fears, your longings, your relationships, the pieces you don't show the world, but that shape every decision you make. Jung called these figures the anima and animus. And whether you know it or not, they've been shaping your inner world since the beginning. What if the real war isn't out there at all? What if the deepest conflict is within and wearing your face? Jung believed each of us carries a hidden figure, an inner companion that wasn't chosen but inherited. For men, it's the anima, the unconscious feminine. For women, the animus, the unconscious masculine. But these aren't just gendered energies. They're archetypes alive, mysterious, and often buried so deep we don't recognize them until they hijack our behavior. You've felt them, that sudden obsession with someone who mirrors a part of you you've lost. That unexplained irritation towards someone who reminds you of something unnamed. That moment you act out of character, overtaken by an emotion you can't trace. That's them. In men, the anima may emerge through mood swings, unexplainable longing, or intense romantic projection. In women, the animus often appears as inner criticism, rigid intellectualism, or emotional detachment. And the more unaware we are of them, the more chaos they create. Jung didn't romanticize these forces. He respected them. He feared their unconscious power. He wrote, "They possess a fatality that can, on occasion, produce tragic results." Because the more perceptive you are, the more emotionally aware, the more these inner forces stir. Your outer clarity activates the shadows within. What you refuse to face inside, you will chase or fight outside. You'll fall in love with illusions. You'll fight ghosts wearing someone else's face. You'll mistake emotional echoes for real connections. Unless you turn inward. And that's where we're going next. We ended last time by confronting a truth. Many run from the conflict isn't just out there, it's within. The deeper you feel, the more likely you are to awaken the very shadows you've spent your life avoiding. And when those inner forces remain unconscious, they don't stay quiet. They leak into our relationships, our decisions, and the very way we see the world. Because here's what no one tells you: when you ignore your unlived self, it doesn't vanish. It waits, and eventually it surfaces, not with words, but with intensity. You'll find yourself battling with your partner, not for what they did, but for what they triggered. You'll swing from craving intimacy to fearing it. You'll want to be seen, but recoil the moment someone gets too close. You'll need too much and trust too little. Push and pull, longing and withdrawal, again and again. Mary Louise von Franz, one of Carl Jung's closest collaborators, described it like this: "The animus fosters loneliness in women, while the anima thrusts men headlong into relationships and the confusion that accompanies them." And this isn't abstract theory. This is your history. Just pause and reflect. How many times have you been overcome by a storm of emotion that made no logical sense? How many arguments weren't truly about the person standing in front of you, but about something older, deeper wound into your psyche like a hidden knot? That's why Jung's work is more vital now than ever. Because we're not just struggling against systems or society, we're often struggling against ourselves, against inner voices we haven't yet dared to hear. Until we do, we stay trapped. We replay the same heartbreaks, the same confusions, the same cycles. Different faces, same story. But something shifts radically when you stop seeing the anima or animus as a flaw and begin to see them as a guide. That's where healing begins. You stop blaming others for what they awaken in you. You stop projecting your unmet needs onto strangers or lovers. You start integrating. You begin the sacred process of reclaiming the parts of yourself that you had unknowingly scattered into other people. And it's not clean. It's not easy. In fact, it's often disorienting, because this kind of healing doesn't ask for performance. It asks for truth. It asks you to sit down not with the mirror on the wall, but with the mirror within, the one that shows you who you've pretended not to be, the pieces you disowned, the voices you silenced, the chaos you feared. But when you truly sit with that mirror, something miraculous begins. The projections fade, the panic softens, the craving for someone else to complete you dissolves. Because now you're not waiting to be saved. You're building a bridge between who you've been and who you're becoming. And the person who walks across that bridge, they don't carry the same weight, because they're no longer running from it. They turned around, they faced it, they listened, and in doing so, they began to lead. Some people carry their burden quietly, like a stone pressed deep into their chest. Others carry it like prophecy. Cassandra did both. The gods gave her the gift of foresight. She could see the future with unshakable clarity. But when she refused Apollo's advances, he cursed her, not by stealing her vision, but by ensuring that no one would believe her. She would speak the truth. She would warn of disaster. She would cry out as the Trojans pulled the wooden horse through their gates, and no one, would listen. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't unstable. She was simply unseen. Her story echoes across centuries because it isn't just myth, it's a mirror. How many times have you known before it happened? How many times have you said, this doesn't feel right, and been brushed aside? How often have you been told you're too much, too emotional, too intense, only to watch what you warned about unfold? You didn't want to be right. You just wanted to be heard. But the world resists truth, especially when it arrives early. Most people don't want to see until it's too late. And those who do, those who see first, feel first, speak first, are often labeled as unstable, dramatic, overreactive. But what if you weren't overreacting? What if you were simply awake in a room full of people still dreaming? Carl Jung knew this weight all too well. He wrote, "A man who knows more than others becomes lonely." Because awareness doesn't just enlighten, it isolates. It creates distance between what you see and what you can safely say. And in that space, doubt creeps in. You begin to question your clarity. You wonder if maybe you are too much. You stop trusting what you know, not because it's wrong, but because it's costly. And in a world obsessed with ease, truth becomes expensive. So you begin to shrink. Not because your vision faded, but because you learned the consequences of speaking it. You start reading the room before you read your own soul. You filter your insights, dilute your voice just to stay connected to people who only love the version of you that stays quiet. This is the quiet death of the seer, not because they go blind, but because they stop offering their sight. Because silence eventually feels safer than dismissal. But silence carries its own price. There comes a moment, a threshold where you feel it, that if you silence yourself one more time, you might never find your truth again. That the more you dilute yourself for others, the more invisible you become. Until one day you realize, the version of you they love isn't even you. And that's where the path splits. Speak and risk exile, or stay silent and lose yourself. It's brutal, but it's not new because someone else once faced that same decision. Not a prophetess this time, but a king, a wise one. And what he chose tells us everything about what it means to see clearly in a world that does not. Let me tell you about him. Because in his story, you might recognize your own. We ended with the image of a fork in the road: speak and risk exile, or stay silent and lose yourself. It's a choice that echoes louder the more awake you become. And now we enter the story of a king and a poisoned well, a parable that feels less like a fable and more like a reflection of the world we're living in. It happened one night. While the city slept, a witch crept silently through the streets, her footsteps unnoticed, under the hush of darkness. She made her way to the town's only well, the very source of life for the entire kingdom. And without a sound, she poured a potion into the water, one drop at a time, watching it swirl into the depths. By dawn, the city stirred. People rose, stretched, and drank. Every citizen, every soldier, every servant, all except the king. And by midday, the city had gone mad. The people began speaking in riddles. They hurled accusations without reason. They feared what didn't exist, praised what held no value. They forgot time, forgot meaning, forgot themselves. Yet to each other, they appeared perfectly sane, because they were all behaving the same. It was the king who now seemed strange, distant, different. He tried to speak reason. He pointed to the confusion, the contradictions, the collapse of clarity. But no one heard him. They watched him with suspicion. They whispered behind the closed doors. They didn't say he was lying. They said he was unwell. By nightfall, they were ready to remove him. Not because he had failed them, not because he had harmed them, but because he had stayed the same while they had changed. Alone in his chamber, the king stood in silence. In his hand, a goblet of water drawn from the same poison well, and he faced a choice: drink and be accepted, or refuse and be exiled. That night, he drank. The next morning, the city rejoiced. Our king is one of us again, they cried. He understands now, but he didn't. Not really. He had simply given up trying to be understood. And so the madness continued. Polite, structured, celebrated. This story isn't about kings and wells. It's about now. It's about you. Because if you've ever hidden your insight just to be accepted, If you've ever laughed at a joke that pierced your chest just to belong, if you've ever nodded in agreement when every cell in your body screamed no, then you've tasted from the well. And maybe you didn't even realize it. Maybe you've been sipping for years, slowly letting go of the parts of you that saw too much, felt too deeply, spoke too early. Maybe you've shaped your truth so carefully, so gently, that it now fits neatly into conversations that once made your skin crawl. But beneath that comfort is grief. The kind of grief that comes not from being wrong, but from abandoning what was right, just to keep the peace. Carl Jung warned about this exact danger. He said, the greatest danger is not being wrong. It's losing yourself in the collective, trading your clarity for applause, giving up your mind so you don't lose your tribe. He knew that individuation, the process of becoming your full, authentic self, requires solitude. It demands you step out of the current even when that current carries everyone you love. It asks you to face the ache of being different, the silence of walking alone, the fear that maybe no one will ever understand you. But Jung also left us something else, a thread, a promise, a flicker of hope. He wrote, no matter how isolated you are, if you do your work truthfully and conscientiously, unknown friends will come and seek you. Unknown friends, not crowds, not saviors, not followers, but real people, the kind who don't flinch at your truth, who don't ask you to shrink. People who don't mistake your clarity for coldness or your depth for drama. But you won't find them if you keep drinking. If you keep pretending, you won't find them in the crowd you had to twist yourself to belong to. You find them by standing tall and trembling in your truth. Even when it costs you the room, even when it costs you comfort, even when it costs you company. You find them by refusing to laugh when your soul aches, by staying clear while the world celebrates confusion, by speaking not because it's safe, but because it's real. And maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're still holding the goblet, still weighing the calm. That's okay. But know this, every time you choose to see and stay silent, a part of you goes silent too. And every time you speak, even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens, you keep something alive, something rare, something sacred. The part of you that was not born to conform, but to wake the sleeping. Last time we talked about the moment you stop hiding and how your burden, once secret and heavy, begins to glow when owned with truth. But before that glow, there's erosion, a slow, invisible wearing down of your spirit from years of holding space for others while no one holds space for you. It's the exhaustion that builds when you're always the one who adjusts, the one who softens the truth, who carries the weight of the room's discomfort, who reads between every line but never gets read in return. And at first you tell yourself it's kindness. You call it empathy. You take pride in being the one who can hold it all. But here's the dangerous part. You get good at it, so good that even you forget how much you have buried, how often you have silenced your inner voice just to keep the peace, until one day it catches up with you. It might arrive as burnout that no amount of sleep can fix, or as a sudden wave of grief you can't explain. Or maybe it comes as a quiet realization that you've filled your life with people who like you better muted. Not because they're cruel, but because they never met the full version of you. And that's when the reckoning begins. This is the real work of individuation, as Jung described it. Not just discovering who you are, but unlearning who you became to survive. Not just waking up, but returning to the version of yourself that once spoke freely, to the insights you used to share before they were ignored, to the intuition you trusted before the world taught you to second guess it. And that return, it isn't graceful. It isn't neat. Because the moment you begin reclaiming your clarity, you also begin losing your camouflage. You become visible again, not as the agreeable, adaptable one, but as the real one. And this is where the loneliness often spikes again, because some of the people closest to you may have never actually known this version of you. And some of them won't want to. But don't let that stop you, because the life you crave, the connection, the freedom, the belonging, only lives on the other side of pretending. And something else happens when you stop hiding. The weight, it doesn't go away, but it changes. It becomes something sacred. It's no longer shame. It's no longer something you carry in secret. It becomes a signal, a gift, a tool, a burden that begins to glow. When the burden becomes a beacon, it happens slowly, so slowly that you almost miss it. One day you're carrying your insight like a curse, a private cross heavy and isolating. The next you find yourself offering it like a lantern. Not because the world got easier, not because people suddenly understood you, but because you did. Because you stopped treating your perception as a problem. Because you stopped apologizing for your intensity. Because you realized your sensitivity wasn't a flaw. It was a compass. Your inner noise wasn't case. It was guidance. And the very things you tried to suppress, they were the exact things someone else was praying to find. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the whole self. Not the curated version of you, not the version you edited for approval, but the full self, the real self. The sacred contradiction of light and shadow logic and intuition, vulnerability and strength. Held together by one thing, courage. And here's the truth about courage. It doesn't always look like boldness. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like choosing to stay present when your instinct says run, like speaking the truth even when your voice trembles, like standing rooted when everything around you begs you to bend. It looks like choosing real over right. And when you do, when you begin walking in your truth, something beautiful happens. People begin to appear, not crowds, not fans, but kindred spirits, quiet ones, brave ones, people who don't flinch at your fire, who don't confuse your clarity for coldness or your depth for drama, people who have walked through their own version of the fire and recognize the burn marks on your soul. They won't need explanations. They'll simply know, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you'll feel it. That click, that resonance, that quiet yes. The sense that you no longer have to dilute yourself to be loved, that your voice is not too much, that your truth is not too strange, that your burden isn't yours alone anymore. Because now it's a bridge, a beacon, a light that not only carries you forward, but calls others home. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you carried it for so long. Not because you were meant to suffer, but because you were meant to lead, not with perfection, not with answers, but with presence, with depth, with truth. The world doesn't need more people who know how to fit in. It needs people who can feel, who can see, who can hold complexity and still choose love. It needs you. So if this found you at the right time, let it be a sign. Say something, even just one word. Drop it into the comments. Say awake, not for the algorithm, for someone else, someone silently scrolling, waiting for proof that they're not crazy, that they're not broken, that they're not alone in being alone. And if you've forgotten how much your light matters, let this remind you it was never just a burden. It was never just weight. It was always the beginning of your light.